So that's starting. And I will choose the right stuff to share off of my screen and computer. Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yeah, we got a Miami Vice vibe here.
I love it.
Hey, it's MSPs after dark. That's how we roll. That's awesome. All right. And make sure I've got this stuff ready. How's you guys' week's been going?
So far, so good.
Busy in the
Excellent.
virtual event space right now.
Oh yeah, that's right, because Robin Robbins is right now, right?
Yep.
Nice. How's that going?
Today's just a pre-day, so just kind of getting everything lifted off. But I think every time I do some of these virtual events, it's a reminder that I can't wait to get back to physical. And I know it's going to be hard for some bigger companies to not do the hybrid and do both, but it's a lot. It's a lot on the vendors to do both.
Oh yeah.
And we have a fairly big staff, but if you're a smaller vendor, it's really hard to manage both elements.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. And the in-person ones are just so much fun.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and it's without the extra distraction. Even though at the physical events, people still had their laptops out in the main sessions and whatnot, but it still wasn't like I can mute you and just look at this screen or
Right.
walk out and do whatever. Right? It wasn't quite the same. So that's awesome. So we'll give a couple minutes here for some more people to filter through, and then we'll kick off. And anybody who misses the beginning or misses the event will get the recording of all of this dark web wisdom you guys are going to spout out for us.
Matt will spout the wisdom. I'll just add some commentary here and there.
I just want to say that this is the first time I've done the webinar at this time, which is lunch hour for me. So
yes.
I am so committed to dark web education today that I am foregoing lunch.
Wow.
So that we can educate the market.
That is a commitment.
If you know me, that is. It really is.
It's a sacred time.
Right? Anything that involves food, that comes between food and me being able to consume it, that it's got to be very important to keep me from that. I think I was like, I was probably eating a sandwich when my one child was even being born. Like it's food.
Important.
All right, so we'll kick off here. We got a few people in, and we'll get going. So welcome everybody to the webinar today. We're hosting, Gradient is hosting the MSP Mindshare, all about the maturation of dark web monitoring. And it's been one of these categories that, I've watched from the sidelines. It just took the market by storm. I remember oddly meeting Matt at, it's got to have been one of your first ever events out, was a Robin Robbins cybersecurity boot camp years ago. Yep. And I was like, that's a really neat idea. I wonder how that's going to go on the IT channel. And now we're here, and you've got, so many people are in the space now. So many MSPs are seeing a bunch of success with it. But I think there's still a lot to be known about it, a lot to be understood, and there's still a lot more opportunity for MSPs and their SMB clients as a result of it. So as we kick off into this webinar, we'll go on with a quick intro video and then into some introductions and housekeeping. Awesome. So quick introduction about Gradient, because there's a lot of people in here who may be saw some of our promotion for this, heard the name, saw it through my LinkedIn or whatnot, but don't know who Gradient is. And at the end of the day, what Gradient is all about, as much as we're building technology and technology solutions, we're about helping MSPs make better decisions. And we understand that in an MSP's life, day in and day out, you are just plagued with making decisions, most of those based on best guesses. So if there's a way that we can help, that's something that we're really working on, is a way to help you as business owners become more business people and make better decisions to help your business to prosper. I will do a quick plug and say join us for our launch event on June 1st with our first product we're bringing to market, along with that mission of helping you make better decisions. So hit up meetgradient.com/launch. My name is Colin Knox. I'm founder and CEO of Gradient MSP. Was a founder and former president of a fast growth MSP, which I exited in 2016. Was the founder and former CEO of Passportal, which we exited to SolarWinds in 2019. I'm a superhero fanatic. You can see that behind me, and you can see my coffee mug as well. I know I'm a nerd. I'm also a hopeless car racer and not overly accomplished in that regard. A little bit of housekeeping here. The session is being recorded, so you don't need to ask that question, but we do expect you to ask questions. We do these sessions, we bring these people and these experts on for you, to help you get educated on the things that you need to know and the things that you're curious about. So please do use the question Q&A panel in the Zoom webinar, and we'll look to get answers from these experts on all of your questions about it. Lastly, this is all about MSP knowledge sharing. This isn't about egos. This isn't about pitching. This isn't about sales. It's about coming together collaboratively to educate the market on the topics that we are well versed on. So without further ado, we'll introduce the panelists and companies joining us today. Art Gross unfortunately couldn't be here. There was a last minute personal emergency that came up. So unfortunately he can't be here, but he's with us in spirit, and we've got a lot of his information that he shared on pre-calls with us to make sure that his voice is heard. And then also joined by Matt Solomon with Kaseya ID Agent and Marcia Dempster with Keeper. So I'll shut up for a minute and let each of you guys introduce yourselves and your companies.
Sure. I guess since I'm in the middle there, I'll go first. Yeah, so Matt Solomon, now Vice President of Business Development at Kaseya, but I really, I guess, earned my stripes in the channel at ID Agent. I was the, outside of the founder, I was the first employee at ID Agent back in 2015, and we came to the channel in late 2017 and went to 1,500 partners in less than, or right around 2 years, and got acquired, and now have almost 4,000 MSP partners. And as you kind of mentioned, Colin, we had the benefit of being the first dark web monitoring company in the channel. Obviously, there's been others now. I mean, it's unbelievable to see the maturation, as you talked about. It's like now, again, when we were talking about it, no one had it, and now it's, how could it not be part of your security stack? So it's been a wild ride. So I'm excited to be here.
Love it. And I'm Marcia Dempster. Thanks for having me, Colin, and good to see you again, Matt. I am the Senior Director of Sales at Keeper Security. We're an enterprise password management platform, and my team specifically lives and breathes in the MSP space. So I'm excited to be here with you guys. And I agree with Matt, like, you're hearing the term dark web monitoring more and more. We kind of look at it here as like an added insurance policy. And it's like, if you don't have that, it's kind of a problem. So ours is called Breach Watch. It scans the dark web for you. And it's one of those things where it's like, if you're not utilizing a tool like that, you're kind of putting yourself at risk. So I'm glad that we can talk about it today.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for being on, guys. And you talk about collaboration. We got two competitors kind of on here. I competed with Keeper for a good while. I competed with Stuff ID Agent had for a good while, and Kaseya.
Towards the end.
We're all friends here. It's all for the
friends.
betterment of the industry and the IT
right.
channel, right? So, like you guys both said, it's almost table stakes now for MSPs to be having this. Yet, it doesn't matter how many thousands Kaseya has or Keeper has or any other companies that are doing this, there's still tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of MSPs out there that are not doing this. And whether that's, they've got unknowns or their own assumptions or whatever, I mean, you've got this like big mystery about the dark web, right? Like, what is the dark web? So maybe we'll start there for some of the attendees and people that are going to watch this after the fact. But like, what exactly is the dark web and why is it so ominous?
Well, I mean, it sounds scary on purpose because it is. I mean, it's a separate part of the web and it exists on dark nets, meaning it's not easily accessible. Most of it is encrypted. It's not traceable. The operators are anonymous. I mean, everything nefarious and scary that you can think of, that's exactly what it is. And it's, something out of a sci-fi movie, the things that go on the dark web. Like it's as bad as it sounds. And, the gist of it is, do you want your stuff on there? Because I don't.
But it is on there.
Right.
Yeah. And as much as I'd love to get away from that iceberg image, it's unavoidable for many reasons. But it really, as Marcia was saying, I mean, it's the unindexed area of the internet. A lot of people are familiar with, well, maybe not everybody, the deeper web, which is, the financial records, medical records, criminal records. But then the dark web is really where all these compromised credentials are being stored, but much more nefarious things going on in terms of, there's hits you could put out on people on the dark web. There's, child pornography there. It gets into a very deep and dark place. I mean, I don't think any of our companies are going into that area, but it's, there's so much things going on, but it's the reoccurring message we talk about really is that it's being run like a business, and MSPs and MSP customers need to know that.
Yeah, and it's crazy the amount that these nefarious groups, I guess we'll call them, are investing in these activities and in the data and in the things that they can do, that like the job postings that you can see that actually happen for people that are hiring, for very specialized set of skills that no regular corporation could really afford to match or pay, because the return on the other side is so unreal. But you guys hinted on a few things in there about, between the dark web and the deep web and some of the stuff that's out there. And it's not just the passwords that are circulating out there. And I was part of riding this whole wave in cybersecurity of digital identity protection and security and, credential and privileged access and stuff. So, and that's kind of the world that we've played in for a good while, even with this, but there's so many more things about the MSPs, about their customers that are online, like their credit cards and their email addresses and stuff. But what else should the MSPs realize is being stored about them or about their customers in the dark web that comes to needing to protect that or mitigate against?
I think, being an MSP as you are, Colin, like you are trusted by your customers to help them make these decisions and to guide them to the right solutions for their businesses. So, I think cybersecurity is one of those things that's scary. There's a lot of different areas that it covers. For us, and what I say is that password management is kind of the tip of that iceberg. It's probably the easiest thing to accomplish, especially when you're talking about scanning the dark web. I mean, like Matt said, like there's the deep web and then there's the dark web, and it's as bad as it sounds. Like, yes, your passwords are out there, but that could also mean that your social security number is out there, your medical information, your children's medical information. So it's like a lot of companies don't want to deal with that or swallow that and take that on. And what we're saying is there's one place you can start, and it's, shoring up those passwords so you're not getting breached that easily. But cybersecurity overall is such a big conversation, and the types of things that, like Matt mentioned, like you can hire someone to kill someone on the dark web. Like that's insane. There's drug traffickers on there. There's human traffickers on there. Like there's terrible things happening. It's like you don't want a part of that, and you certainly don't want your business to be exposed to that.
Well, and interestingly, guys, like Matt, I think I saw this through one of your posts too or something, but there was actually a technician that left an MSP fairly recently and was selling access to
Yeah.
all of the clients that they weren't locked out of on the dark web. Like,
God.
this is a real thing.
Yeah. And a good reminder to have onboarding and offboarding policies. But yeah, I mean, you talked about like the different data sources, and we mentioned a lot of them. Of course, social security number, and the problem is with that is there's not a lot of remedies to that being out there. The IP addresses is really important as well. Sometimes we'll find IP addresses, and typically that's related to some type of malware. So those are critical to be aware of. But the reality is, if you think about the publicly available information about anybody right now, and I can't think of the websites, but there's like ones where you can just like look up people. And it gives
We've
you
watched that Kevin Mitnick keynote too many times.
yeah, I mean,
It's
it's like you get a dossier on somebody, and then in addition to a dossier, you have their passwords for various, third-party applications. Then it becomes a real problem. And I'm sure we'll get into this, but it's like, it's not just about your network password being exposed. Your password to these SaaS applications that you're using for work-related purposes can be just as damaging. I mean, imagine your CRM password
Yeah.
getting out there. You imagine how much damage you could do within getting into somebody's CRM.
It's nuts, right? And I mean, you guys, I'm sure you guys have it with a Passly solution, and whether it's in MyGlue, and you definitely have it in Keeper, but like the amount of password reuse out there is insane because it's convenient, right? And so you may think, oh shucks, my password from LinkedIn in 2012 got breached. Big deal. You know how many people are still using the same password that they used back in 2012, but not just on LinkedIn, for everything else? It's crazy, right? That just goes into the big dictionary of everything that they're running through when they're trying to brute force hack into things now, right? So yeah, kind of crazy. So I know we kind of covered that one quick story about the technician that listed their clients' access for sale there, but surely you guys have come across some crazy stories with partners about dark web monitoring, things discovered, things happen. So maybe we can share a fun story here before we dig into a few other things.
I had a
Anything come to mind?
customer once, yeah, actually. So before Keeper, I was in the VAR space for a long time. I spent many years at CDW. I had a customer once, and we were doing a consultative solution. So it was all different pieces of, security and SD-WAN and all this stuff. And the gentleman in charge of this project on the customer side said that he didn't want to, quote, dabble in cybersecurity because if he started going down that road, then it would expose him to the dark web. And the answer was, by not doing this, you're exposing your business to the dark web. He was in the mindset that like once you start preparing yourself for an attack, that you're opening yourself up to an attack. So that there was a lot of education that had to happen there. But you see that like when people don't understand things, it freaks them out and they're less likely to take those proactive steps because they think if they avoid it and just leave it alone, that it's going to go away. But we obviously know that doesn't work.
Yeah, and I would add on the educational piece, because I think there's a misconception, and I don't know every detail about the competitors and whatnot, but I don't, in general, unless you're paying for a much higher level of service, which I don't think is happening in the MSP space, no one is out there putting a target on your back because we're going out and looking for these credentials. It's basically, it's looking for a domain. So we're not out there saying, is Gradient out there on the dark web? Like, we're not putting some like, Batman signal out there. So it's not putting a bigger target. These things are already out there. They
Right.
exist out there. So I think that's important to know. I have a couple stories. One of my favorite ones, an MSP owner shared with us at a live event. And this gets back into one of the biggest objections an MSP will face. It's the same objection we hear all the time, which is they show the report and it says, it'll show active employees and people who haven't been there in a long time. and they will skip over every active employee and they'll go directly to the employee who hasn't been there for years. And they'll say, well, why do I care about this person? They haven't been here in 3 years. Well, you should care because a lot of these places didn't have offboarding policies. They have no idea where their employees were using passwords and reusing them and could still be active. So this admin reviewed the report and she's like, I recognize this password. And she's like, this is our bank password. Even the person hadn't been there in 3 years, but she's like, this is the same password we use for our banking, and had access to $1 million in cash. Now, luckily, no one had, I guess, had done anything with it, but like, that's how damaging it can be. And that's like, that MSP now had all the power in this conversation. So they, of course, implemented onboarding policies and offboarding policies. And then they had an opportunity to talk about a lot of other different services. So there's so many ways to utilize that. And I can tell you from our own experience, and this gets into the sales side of it, really how powerful it is. This is before we went into the channel. We were reaching out to state governments and we got meetings with a lot of states, and it was kind of one of those like, come back to us when you've gotten your first state and then we'll think about it kind of thing. And this is like very early on in kind of the compromise world. And we had a conversation with a state. They were interested, but they didn't move forward. Well, 2 months later, an incident occurred and the governor of that state was getting doxxed. And long story short, you would not believe, Colin, how fast governments can move when they need to with money. Cause like, it takes a long time, at least in the US, the government can take so long to procure they procure that within probably a week. And then we were providing dark web monitoring for an entire state government. And so there's so many opportunities that this lends itself to, where you can then upsell all these other opportunities in security.
Yeah, no, that's kind of crazy. Wow. So with that, I mean, you've got monitoring. RMM is probably the most popular and most used category and solution in an MSP's business today. But I think the monitoring aspect of this seems to not take or get enough attention by MSPs out there. And I know with some of the MSPs I've talked to, they see it more as a point in time check. Hey, we're going to do this point in time. Look, these credentials, go change them, or yeah, you're good. Everything's good till next year type of thing. But it's to me, it really does seem like this is an ongoing monitoring thing, because there's a frequency of breaches that's happening, and the amount of data that's becoming available on the dark web, the amount of password reuse that happens or password recycling that happens. So, how do you guys help your partners, and how do you help them educate their clients to see it not as a point in time scan, but as an ongoing service and a monitoring service? And what really is the frequency that breaches are happening at these days?
Constantly. I mean, not a day goes by that you don't hear about one. I mean, we probably hear about more of them than most people just based on the industry that we're in. But I mean, in the past few days, you've seen one that I can think of off the top of my head in the news, like major news. So that kind of stuff is happening constantly. And just because it's not happening to you and you're seeing it happen to, government entities or businesses, doesn't mean it's not happening to just regular people like us. So, from our perspective, our Breach Watch tool is scanning the dark web constantly. It's encrypted both ways. So again, we still can't see your passwords. But what's happening is it's ciphertext encrypting and scanning the dark web to see if there's anything that matches up to your password, letting us know that, this has likely been breached. Your password is somewhere on the dark web. Change it right now. So that's happening behind the scenes constantly. And it's like you said, Colin, it shouldn't be viewed as a point in time thing. This shouldn't be happening like, oh, let's do a dark web scan once a week. Like, that should be happening behind the scenes constantly. Just like you're backing up your data, just like you're updating your contacts and backing it up to the cloud, or saving your family photos. Like, this is something that should be happening constantly, so you're not losing your data, your privacy, your sensitive material for your business or your personal life. So, I would say it's happening constantly, so that your dark web activity should be monitored and scanned constantly.
Yeah, and I think it's key. I mean, and I think that's an objection sometimes the MSP gives us, or sometimes their client gives them. And, because you often hear like, well, we reset our passwords every 90 days. But if you reset your password on day 90 and day 1 of your new password, it gets exposed, like the new one gets exposed, it doesn't really matter. And so there is that, you do need to be consistently monitoring for it. We talked about those other points of data, right? So, the IP addresses or social security number, you need to be aware of those things. Again, there might be employees who are logging into systems that you didn't know about, and now in month 2 of the service that came to light, and now you're like, oh my god, I didn't even know that Colin had logged into this whatever company, right? So there's that ongoing thing that's so important. And I think it's important for ongoing education of your own employees, because I think the more they see this stuff, the more it becomes believable. I mean, it's definitely jarring the first time you see your password out on the dark web, and it gets more even personal when people do tend to use like a kid's name or a dog, anything, and you see that, and man, you get it kind of sets you back. You're like, whoa, all right.
Well, it's so true. I mean, I don't know how many times we've seen each other on the road, and when live events were a real thing and the only thing. And I know at your guys' booth you had the, hey, come plug your email address in and whatever. And every time forever, I was like, haha, you've got nothing on me. And then there was the one time I was like, oh crap. Back out. You work the booth. I'll be back in a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's like you said earlier,
out of nowhere.
Like a lot of people, and I'm guilty of it, I'm sure that you guys are too, you're using the same passwords across different platforms. So it's like your Instagram password might be the same as your network password at work, or like if you're using your dog's name or a piece of your address or your birth date or something like that is not secure, and you can't use the same passwords across multiple platforms, especially when you're blending personal and business.
Yeah, and variations, right? I mean, and there's a great comedy bit. I'll try to find the link, but where he talks about like, everybody does the explanation point, and actually companies like, I know Bank of America eliminated the ability to use the explanation point because that's what everybody does, or they add
1, 2, 3 after.
Yeah, and then it becomes 2 and becomes 3. So these are all common practices that unfortunately we're all guilty of, and that is why password management is so critical. And the bonus of password management is not only are you not relying on a repetitive password, you're now also getting more visibility into where your employees are logging in. I mean, it's not nothing's perfect, right? They could still log in without it somewhere else, but it's still giving you some level of visibility into those things.
So let's divert a little bit even from what we planned and talked about already, because that the word password keeps coming up, and passwords are compromised on the dark web. Well, there's this whole evolution and coming tide of passwordless technology. And there's this potential of what goes obsolete when passwordless tech comes in, and even what passwordless technology is going to look like. I know for a lot of MSPs, it's not as relevant, because when it comes to shared credentials and the need for shared privilege credentials and how long it's going to take for various infrastructure and administrative systems and everything else to adopt that level. But how are you guys looking at what's coming with passwordless technology and how that impacts what's on the dark web, or how you guys could help partners approach what's going to remain on the dark web?
Well, I think you kind of nailed it in how you just summarized it. Like, the change into something like that would be lengthy. So you have to think about government agencies and just large scale businesses that don't move as quickly as we do. I mean, technology changes every second, but some of these larger, monolith companies, they're not going to adapt to like using your retina scan as a password. But when you think about it, like a retina scan or your fingerprint, I mean, you do that on your phone, like that technically is a password. So
you just can't change that password.
Right, you can't change it. So it's like that is something to think about, and it goes into, you know, that crazy sci-fi world that we were talking about before. Like all of these things are happening so quickly, but it's like just because it's not a word and characters doesn't mean it's not considered a password. That would be my take on that, but I'm interested to hear Matt's because he's smarter than me.
No, well, I don't know. I don't know if I am.
He hasn't had
area.
time to research this one.
I was 100% Googling when you started saying that.
What is passwordless? That's a thing?
No, I mean, I know
joking.
it's a thing. I just like, I don't know that I had a great answer for it. But you know, as you're talking about, I was thinking about like the fact that my computer, you know, I don't even think about it, but yeah, I mean, I use my index finger to get into my computer. You know, we're definitely, it's going to be a while, I think, before we're completely off passwords. And I don't know that I can speak intelligently onto when that would actually be and how that transition really happens, other than like the first step is getting everybody on multi-factor authentication. Like, I mean, that's still, I do think, I mean, this is obviously with COVID, I think that changed the dynamic of multi-factor authentication. I think all users now finally understand why they need it, even if they think it's a pain in the ass. You know, I think they definitely understand it and are more open to it. And I think, you know, obviously, and, you know, I'm guessing Keeper does similar stuff, you know, the capability to do single sign-on and stuff like that, so that you're using one thing to launch yourself into all these applications. And actually that makes it significantly easier. So it might be some upfront work sometimes, but I mean, you know how many times you have to reset a password because you don't remember it? I mean, it's a pain. It takes a lot of tech time, and you know, MSPs. I can't even imagine how much tech time is wasted on password resets for their customers.
I did a lot of research on that, but we won't go there.
Okay.
But no, you're right, and I think at the end of the day, though, there's always going to be an underlying authentication key, whether, you know, which is a password, whether that's a token, whether that's a handshake, whether that's a certificate, a digital signature of what your biometric reading is and stuff, right? And even with single sign-on, I still need a way to authenticate into that. So I think, you know, there's probably always going to be something that needs to be protected. And you think if a digital signature, which was biometric, they get into your SSO product, became available on the dark web to download and use, how much more widespread does that become as a risk point? So I think, you know, I think you guys satisfied me. Dark web monitoring is something that you should probably, it's got some life to it yet here. So we've talked a lot about the data that's on there. We've talked a lot about why you need to pay attention to that and everything else. But what we haven't talked about is why, right? Like, what are the types of attacks that can occur as a result of somebody getting your data off the dark web? Like, how are people actually using the data that they're getting that's compromised on the dark web?
I know that, you know, just off the top of my head, the amount of ransomware attacks have spiked significantly since most people have been remote during COVID. And that's truly what it sounds like. It's somebody getting a hold of your data and holding it hostage until you pay them. And a lot of times you can have cyber security insurance. So you can send that to your insurance company and say, we have a ransomware problem. Like, do we pay this? What happens? And that's smart. Like, you should be prepared for something like that. But how much time is that taking away from your business? How long can you afford to be down for? And how much can you afford to pay these people? What if you don't have cyber insurance and they're asking for $3 million? Maybe your business can pay that, but then can you make payroll in 2 weeks? I don't know. Like, so we're seeing a lot of that. Like, I've heard of more and more ransomware attacks recently. Of course, phishing is never going to go away. There's always going to be phishing attacks. But I would say that ransomware is the scariest one that we're seeing a lot more of lately, and it's becoming a lot more sophisticated. They're getting better at it. You know, you think of these hackers as like this group of guys like sitting in a basement and like playing video games. Like, that's not what it is. It could be somebody sitting next to you at Starbucks that's really computer savvy and knows how to hack your stuff. It's, you know, unfortunately, it's becoming easier and easier to be a hacker and to get access to people's very sensitive data. And that's expensive, and it's not just expensive to your wallet, but it could be expensive to your business expenses as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so much of the ransomware is being deployed, through phishing emails with malware. I mean, phishing is the ultimate name of the game. I mean, that's how most of this stuff is happening. And I don't usually like to stat people to death, but there's, the Verizon data breach report, and I would encourage anybody to read that. I mean, 80% of hacking related breaches all stem from a compromised credential. I mean, the Office of Personnel Management in the US, this is what kind of set off this whole thing. And we were actually involved in kind of the back end of it. One compromised credential led to 800,000 compromised credentials. So it all starts with the password. It's, you think of the Target breach, it started with a password from their HVAC company that they, but it all started with a single password. And so that's the damage that can be done with a password. And even just like on a social engineering perspective, think about if I get access, Colin, to your email, think about how much information I can gather from that and then create one of the most sophisticated phishing emails, either to you or to your friends, that because I'm now looking at trade secrets that you're having between your friends that only you guys would know. And I can use that as a way to shape a phishing email. One of my favorite examples, and it's been going on for years, and we used to talk about this on the road all the time, was the sextortion email, right? It was this idea that they took the data from LinkedIn, so they took all the breaches, the passwords that got exposed in a LinkedIn breach, and basically sent out this massive email saying, hey, we caught you looking at adult content. Here's your password. And even if the password had nothing to do with like an adult website login or anything like that, it freaks you out if you've, one, looked at adult content, and two, that's a password. I mean, it's just inevitable. It's going to freak you out. And, that's the way they can use it. I mean, that's an extreme kind of example, but you take somebody's password and you put that in an email, it makes you feel like you've been had, like they have you. So,
well, I mean, it seems like it's further reaching a lot of the time too, right? Like it's not a quick ransack, try to grab what I can and go. These people are intelligent, sophisticated, and they're methodical, right? Like I know of a situation where somebody's Microsoft 365 credential got exposed, and the people went, they used it, they logged in, but they just logged in and started reading the emails that were being sent and who they were being sent to, and they like studied the communication style of the person. And then they started sending emails out to those other people with phishing links and everything else, but speaking like that individual to people that they had been recently corresponding with about topics they had been corresponding about, to then go and grab access to their stuff or steal their credentials or get them to plug a credit card number in, or, like close sales deals. Hey, I paid for this service. Why aren't I provisioned yet? Type of stuff. So it's kind of crazy how they'll approach it to get the end game and end goal of what they're trying to accomplish, right?
Can I actually, Colin, I was just going to share this kind of crazy story I heard the other day, and I had never heard the reason behind this. So if and there are a lot of phishing emails that pretend come out of, or at least perceived to be coming out of Nigeria, right? It's like that. I mean, everybody's kind of heard of that scam.
Yeah.
Well, one of the questions is always, people, a lot of times you're like, but it's so obvious because they misspell things, right? Well, it turns out this is actually a strategy, because when they send out these phishing emails, believe it or not, so many people can fall for it. They actually need to weed out some of what they would refer to as the smarter people. Now, I'm not saying anybody who falls for this are dumb, but what they're trying to get is for people who are still falling for it, even though there's misspellings and it's obvious that it's not, that it's a phishing email, they're weeding through because those people are more likely to then pay whatever, so it's just, I was fascinated to hear that for the first time.
So I forget which one it was, but there was actually one of the email marketing companies was the most popular amongst these phishing type people. And they were using it much like you might use a HubSpot or MailChimp or Constant Contact or whatever, because you get your email statistics. So they would send out these mass emails through the service. They know who's clicking on links, who's opening the emails and clicking, who's opening the emails and not clicking. And they study this stuff to be able to figure out, okay, this, and that's how they create the higher quality lists to then sell out on, you know, the dark web and everything else. Like it's crazy because they can say, here's the suckers that are clicking on everything I send out. You want me to send an email on your behalf? Give me the link to your ransomware and everything else, and bada boom, it's kind of done. So, you know, we've covered all of this information so far, and you know, I know that again, even as many partners as you guys all have, there's still many that don't have it, and even some of the partners that you have maybe aren't being as successful as they could be with it. And I know a lot of MSPs have taken to using the dark web monitoring as a prospecting tool, because you can walk in the door and say, hey, is this password look familiar? Guess you should hire us. But I can't help but think that this is a great opportunity to help MSPs move upstream a bit, move into the mid-market segment. You know, how would you guys suggest that an MSP could approach entering into the mid-market by using a service like this to get their foot in the door with larger clients that already have an IT department?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. There's a huge opportunity there. Everything we've been talking about, it's scary, and you know, you don't want to use fear as a selling tactic, but it's real. Like that's a real tool that you can use. So when you're talking to your customers, it's like we said earlier, it's kind of the tip of the iceberg. Securing your passwords is the first step in a larger strategy. But if you can show that value by utilizing a tool, making your customers understand how it works, you're showing the value of you as an MSP and saying, you know, let me guide you through this. Let me help you. Let's make sure those passwords are secure. You know, 80-something% of breaches occur because of a weak password. If you're using your Facebook password as your network password or as your Salesforce password, you're exposing that whole company to a huge breach and a lot of expenses and fines. I mean, when you think of compliances, if you violate HIPAA or high trust, anything like that, you don't want to mess around with that stuff. So it is a little bit of, you know, selling by fear, but the fear is real, especially when people are remote and you're not certain that they're on secure networks. Are they logging in from Starbucks down the street because they need to get out of their house for a few hours? Like that's a real thing. So I think it just gives the MSP an opportunity to really show their value and provide a little bit of a safety net to their customers.
Yeah, God, there's a lot of areas I can go with this conversation.
We
I
got
think
time.
Yeah, well, so many things are coming in my head. So one, you know, I think it's important, and I'm sure no matter what company you're representing, you know, here, there's always an MSP who feels like it doesn't work, like they're not having success. I mean, we've all experienced that. You know, and one, I would encourage you to reach out to your whichever organization you're working with, because a lot of times it's just that you're not delivering it the right way, because this is touchy subject sometimes, and yeah, there is some fear to it, but as Marcia said, like this is real, so it's out there whether they want to know about it or not in a way. So like it's out there. So a lot of it's about the approach. So one thing I would say is you should never show the data. So if depending on how your approach is, one, you should never, I always say share the data or the report that you're going to provide either via screen share or in person. Do your best not to just give up the report, because you give up the report, they're going to read it however they want. They're going to come up with 10 objections and they're going to be like, ah, okay, it's that moment in time thing. They've got the report, they're fine. That being said, you should never hold data hostage, because that's when you get into the issue of like, well, now you're like extorting me for a meeting or whatever. So usually if somebody's like combative, what I say is, look, I hear what you're saying. I can tell you're a little bothered by this. What I'm going to do is, as a courtesy, even though I normally wouldn't do this, I'm going to share the data with you because you absolutely need to know about this, regardless of whether you sign up with me. And people usually respect that. And that's, you know, an opportunity to at least get somebody to calm down. And I can tell you, a lot of times the people who are most kind of reactive to it, you can turn them around a lot of times. You kind of kill them with a little bit of kindness and kill them with transparency. And then the mid-market, just kind of talking about that is, that's your door. I mean, it's your door opener regardless of what size organization, but what a great opportunity. Because if you're coming in with dark web monitoring, that's probably not perceived as a threat to the IT person, because that's always the
not
issue,
like
right?
server monitoring and administration or help desk.
Right. Yeah. And the beauty of it is, based on, Keeper and Breach Secure now, obviously Officers too, you get in with dark web maybe, and then you have conversations about security awareness training, maybe multi-factor authentication. So you're still stacking things eventually, but again, you're not even remotely trying to take over you're there to support them. And I think you have that opportunity to really build that relationship with them. And the last thing I'll mention, I think, is sharing real examples that matter to them. So the best thing I would say is talking about a Marriott breach or British Airways to a manufacturing company in Michigan is unless they're like big Marriott people, like it's kind of a useless example. So one thing we have, and you can be a partner of Keeper or Breach Secure Now, and you can still utilize this. We have something called the Week in Breach. It's part of our blog. Every week we talk about breaches from across the world, and it's not just the large breaches that we're talking about. We're talking about the school systems, manufacturing. Use those as your stories. Like, that's how you get people. You got to share real stories that relate to them. We actually had an MSP sell a client because the client's competitor was featured in the Week in Breach, and they were like,
wow.
you can't let this is your competitor. Like, you can't let this happen to you. And so that, those are those opportunities. And actually another story that came up that's really interesting. This is probably 2 years ago. A credential came up for a customer, and it didn't at the time. They kind of looked into it, and it didn't seem like there was anything major. But what they ended up, because that triggered them to do some further investigation, they ended up finding malware. I think completely unrelated to the credential exposure, but it gets you into this rhythm of being a lot more security centric. And I think it was Huntress that did the back end stuff that worked. But I mean, we have no way of knowing exactly how much we saved that company based on that one credential that they were able to see and then catch. So those are the things that just get you in a much more security centric mindset.
Totally.
Well, that's kind of a good entry into the next thing, right? Like you mentioned some other security solutions and stuff like that, and a lot of times it's not a one thing solves all. It's a cybersecurity framework or structure that you have to put in place and manage. And it seems to me that there would be some really stellar opportunities to bundle dark web monitoring with some other adjacent or related offerings for MSPs like password management. What have you guys seen in that regard that you would recommend MSPs look at to help improve adoption with their clients of services they're already offering that could be complemented by dark web and elevate both, or that dark web could be elevated by packaging on another solution that just kind of flows really well?
I mean, I'm seeing that bundling is a huge thing, and it's kind of a win-win for the end user customers. MSPs really understand what their customers need. And if it's something as simple as two-factor authentication, like, we can do that. But also, maybe you should look at a single sign-on partner, pair the two together, and that solves a whole other world of problems, right? But when you're talking about an overall cybersecurity strategy, there's so many moving parts. And if you're doing a bundle, like, okay, well, let's focus on password security, server security, and maybe physical security. Like, if you are opening up your office, like, how are employees coming in and out? How are you keeping track of who's on your network? Do you have a guest Wi-Fi network? There's so much involved there. So if an MSP is savvy enough, and I think so many of them are lately, to create a bundle type SKU or package for their customers, it really reinforces what a value add the MSP is to their customer. Like, Colin, you understand the ins and outs of what your customers need. So you're putting together solutions that make their businesses flow smoother, make everything run a little easier, and gives them peace of mind. Like, that's a no-brainer. So MSPs that are thinking outside the box and putting together those solutions that aren't just one partner or one specific technology, it's encompassing the whole business to take care of their customers, that's a win-win for all of us on this call, and MSPs and customers and all of our partners.
Yeah. I've always kind of said, dark web monitoring, it leads to well, so here's what I'll say. It's the one piece when you're talking about security, a lot of times you're saying this could happen, and this could happen. Dark web monitoring is the one piece when you're pulling that report for the first time. It's the one time you can say, well, this has actually already happened.
Yeah.
And what it does is it leads to every other security conversation. Because if you're asking me, how do you sell security awareness and phishing? Dark web report. How do I sell DNS filtering? Dark web report. How do I sell multi-factor, single sign-on, password, all that stuff? Dark web report, because that's the genesis of why a lot of those things are needed, because of that compromise, email security. So I think it just empowers. That's the best part about it, and that's why it took off like a rocket ship in this space, because it empowered MSPs to talk about security in a way they've never had. And so you go in there with a lot more confidence when you have information on something that has already occurred. And yes, you're going to get objections. I guarantee every company you work with, whether it's us or Keeper or Breach Secure Now, has answers to those objections. Just utilize your vendor partner to get some of those answers, so that whoever your person is answering those knows those like the back of the the back of the hand. They just know how to respond. And I would encourage you to overcome those objections ahead of time. So what I always told MSPs is, like, when you're showing that report, again, we talked about that number one objection. What I always say is, look, this report I'm showing you is a historical report, and it absolutely has value. But the real value of this is the ongoing monitoring. So I'm setting the stage. And I'll even say, you're going to find employees who no longer work here. And here's why that's important. I'm saying all of this before they ever get a chance to say all that. That's pretty common sense sales, right? Just overcoming the 2 or 3 objections are coming, and puts you in a more of a powerful position, I think.
No, those are some great points. I mean, it's definitely a big thing where, how many MSPs, I'm sure you guys have talked to a lot too, that and over the years, hundreds or thousands I've spoken to that say, I can't get my clients to attend a QBR, or I don't know how to run a good QBR and give value to my clients in it. This seems like one of those things that should be the standard report that gets reviewed and says, hey, look, this quarter, this is how many times we found credentials compromised on the dark web. Or maybe this quarter was the first time we found your credentials on the dark web. Let's have a conversation about how we can mitigate that and all the other factors that come into play. There's a good chance that the credential was on the dark web because they succumbed to a phishing attack. Well, now let's do some simulated phishing, or let's do some other security awareness training, or let's do some other things. And you had a good point, guys, is that you can leverage that to instigate other conversations, because I know it's when somebody has a breach or a compromise of any sort, or any sort of cybersecurity event that occurs, it's just hidden, brushed away. We don't talk about it. We don't share it. I don't want it in the news. It's embarrassing, because there's all the statistics too that, I forget what it is, but I think it was around 60% of businesses won't do business with a company who has had a known cybersecurity event, right? And 30% of your customers will stop doing business with you if you do. So, I mean, that in itself is enough motivation on it, but people don't talk about it. So you don't get all that evidence to say this has happened. And that's pretty cool about this, for sure. Also is very uncool about it, but that's kind of the nature of the beast in it.
Okay, and Colin, can I add something there? So, the other thing, because often, price comes up, for reasons an MSP may not decide to move forward with dark web monitoring. So one, if you're looking at your P&L statement, I would truthfully split this off. Half of it, to your standard like operating costs, and half of it to me should be marketing, because this is one of the, I stand on this to this day, and I've been in sales for, 18 years. It's the best sales tool I have ever had access to in my entire life. I've never had something that can get me first time meetings with people that I had no business getting meetings with. I've shared the stories before, but before we went into the MSP market, I got the CIO of Starbucks, Walmart, Panera Bread, Best Buy, SC Johnson, and about 50 other Fortune 500 companies just because of this data. So when used properly, there's just nothing like it. And so you're talking about it from a marketing cost, it's very minimal, and you're going to get way more results from this than a lot of other efforts. And I can tell you, and what's got to be one of the worst feelings is if you're an MSP that's not offering dark web monitoring and a competitor comes in and brings in that report. That has got to be a terrible feeling, because that is going to put you on defense big time.
Definitely.
Well, you look at, I remember when I was running an MSP, and every MSP does it, the network assessment, right? And you go in and you're hunting for issues, right? You might not even follow the checklist anymore. It's like, if I find that you wrapped the wrong color cable here, I'm going to tell that client that you should never use a red cable, right? Like, whatever it is. And you just sat there, and I remember we had done a bunch of network assessments, and then we said, oh crap, we're so busy trying to get new clients and do these network assessments. We should do some ourselves on the clients that we already have and see what we find, right? So you're bang on. Like, how embarrassing if a client comes to you and says, we had another firm that offered a free assessment of our network, and they came in and did it, and here's what they found, and you're just boom, your face is white, you don't know what to do, you're embarrassed, you've got all these weird feelings. Yeah, absolutely the same thing. Because before you used to be able to fight and say, well, no, that's kind of a tomato thing. Like, there's different approaches and blah, blah, blah. There is not you somehow let our credentials on the dark web. You failed us, even if it's not your fault, right? You didn't tell us our credentials were on the dark web. Absolutely could just be night and day difference of retaining or client or just having them fully handled. So definitely a good point. Looking at the time, we're running right out. So I want to give you guys each kind of one last chance. Any other tips, advice, other thing you want to add before we wrap up this show, which went really quick?
I mean, I feel like we've mentioned it all. Like, we've taught you guys how to do everything. No, I'm just kidding. I would always say defer to the experts, end user customers, defer to your MSPs, defer to your partners that you trust, that you've evaluated the technology, that can offer something in return for the time and effort that you're putting into bringing these deals to a close. And, we're here to help, and our days inside and out involve cybersecurity and keeping people protected and keeping your information off of the dark web, because it's a scary place. So defer to the experts, ask for help, and stay ahead of it. Honestly, don't wait for yourself or your business to get hacked. Like, be prepared, have a strategy before something bad happens. Because most of us aren't Target or Home Depot or, a lot of these huge companies that get hacked and can recover, because they can pay those fines. They can hire a PR firm to fix it in the news. Most businesses don't have that luxury. So having a strategy in place and not letting the fear overtake you into not doing something, just do something.
Yep.
Well said.
And I think I just to kind of recap, just, obviously presenting the data in a respectable way. Best case scenario, you're doing it in person when we can, and or over a web, Zoom like we're doing. Don't hold the data hostage. Give it up if ultimately they're not going to take a meeting with you and they just are saying like, don't, that you're extorting or whatever they want to say. Just give it to them, and you just never know where that conversation will go after the fact. In fact, I actually signed the largest law firm in the world doing it exactly that way early on in my days. Just like Marcia said, leverage your partners. We're in this every day. I mean, Colin knows this better than anybody, right? We're not successful if you're not successful. So we all have sales enablement programs that are, that might be varying in different ways, but we're all there. We all hear from MSPs what works, what doesn't work. So why not take advantage, and depending on the level of sales enablement program that you have with us, we actually have a level where we will get on webinars with you or for you. And we can represent you as your MSP. We don't have to have our ID agent logo on. And again, we can deliver that message to your customers, and reach out to us and brainstorm on how best to approach these things. So that you
Awesome.
don't feel like you're making the mistakes.
No, absolutely. There's definitely power in community and power in getting access to those who can give you the wealth of knowledge available. So excellent. Last quick closing thing, stay connected. If you guys like this content, we do these types of webinars regularly. We somehow are able to wrestle competitors to come on panels to help educate the market. So stay connected. If you haven't signed up for access and other timely advice at meetgradient.com, do so. Give us a follow on social. And to the panelists, thank you very much for all of your enlightenment today. We appreciate it. And thanks to everybody for attending, and look forward to seeing you guys all on the next one.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.